Part 1. The Hour They Cry. Introduction. They thought the dead had no memories, that once the infection spread, it erased everything. Names, faces, even pain. But at 3 a.m., something happens. They stop, they look around, and sometimes they cry. Welcome to a town where the dead aren't just walking, they're remembering. The town of Hollow Creek had become a graveyard with streetlights. Shattered glass lined the sidewalks. Doors hung broken on their hinges. And the only movement came from the slow, deliberate drag of feet that no longer knew rest. Since the outbreak 3 months ago, time had lost all meaning, except for 1 hour. One terrifying, inexplicable hour. At exactly 3 a.m., every single night, the zombies paused. Marla Jennings had survived longer than most. She lived holed up in the attic of her parents' abandoned antique shop, surviving off canned food and stale crackers, too afraid to risk scavenging far. By day, she moved like a whisper, avoiding the infected that shuffled through the streets like broken puppets. But by night, she stayed awake, especially at 3 a.m. That hour haunted her. It started a month ago. She had been curled under a dusty blanket, watching the hands of the cracked wall clock inch closer to midnight. When she heard it, soft crying. She thought it was a dream at first, but then she heard the murmuring. Words, not growls, not groans. Words. From the window, she saw them, a cluster of zombies, about 10 of them, standing motionless in the street. One had dropped to its knees. Another had raised a trembling hand toward the window of a familiar-looking house. A third was whispering a name. Alice, where? Alice. Marla didn't breathe. Couldn't. The creatures looked lost, confused, as if waking from a long and terrible dream, only to find themselves trapped in another. She watched as one of them, an older man with half his face torn away, sat down on the curb and looked at the stars. Tears rolled down what remained of his cheek. And then, at exactly 4 a.m., the change reversed. The confusion vanished. The growls returned. The hunger reignited. They rose and wandered again as mindless as before. Marla had counted the nights since then. She documented them in a notebook, always at 3 a.m., always for an hour. They remembered. The next day, Marla couldn't shake the image from her mind. The crying zombie, the soft whisper of a forgotten name. She had heard stories during the early weeks of the outbreak, rumors that the infected retained slivers of their former selves. A man had claimed his zombified wife stared at her wedding ring for 10 minutes before attacking him. A little girl in a hospital corridor had sung a nursery rhyme before turning violent. Most dismissed these as hallucinations brought on by trauma and sleep deprivation. But now, Marla knew the truth. They weren't just walking corpses. Something lingered. That evening, as dusk settled over Hollow Creek, Marla made a choice. She would stay awake again, not just to observe, but to try something no one had dared before. She would talk to them. At 2:55 a.m., Marla crouched behind a wooden display case at the front of the shop, her breath fogging the dirty glass. Her heart pounded like a drum. She clutched a flashlight in one hand and a crowbar in the other, not for protection, but in case she needed to make noise. If things turned ugly, the street outside was still. A low fog clung to the ground, making everything seem dreamlike. She watched the shadows move. One by one, they appeared. 8 of them tonight, all in various states of decay. One had no jaw. Another was missing an eye. But they didn't attack. They didn't lurch. They stopped, and then, like every night before, the shift began. It started in the eyes. A glimmer, a flicker of something human. One woman tilted her head toward the sky and whispered, "Mom." Another looked at her rotted hands and shook violently, whispering, What did I do?" The older man who had sat on the curb a night before returned. He stared at a crumpled wallet in his hand. He muttered a name. "Benny." Marla stepped out from behind the display case. Her legs trembled. She slowly opened the front door. The night air was bitter. The fog curled around her ankles. They didn't turn. She walked out, hard in her throat, and whispered, "Hello?" A few heads turned slowly. No growling. No rushing. Just stairs. The woman closest to her blinked. Something behind her cloudy eyes sparked. You're not supposed to be out here, she said. Marla's breath caught. The voice was soft, strained, but human. The woman blinked again and then clutched her head. It hurts, she whispered. Everything hurts. What's your name? Marla asked, stepping closer. The woman looked down, confused, then whispered, Angela. I think my name was Angela. Do you remember what happened to you? Angela looked at her with wide, wet eyes. We were at church. There was screaming. My daughter, where's my daughter? Before Marla could respond, the man with the wall approached. His eyes locked onto Marla's face. I'm sorry, he said, voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt him. Hurt who? My son, he whispered. I remember now he was scared. I was scared. There was blood. He tried to hide. Tears streamed down his decayed face. Marla felt her throat tighten. They were aware. At least, for this 1 hour, they were people. The others began to murmur. One began to sing. Another knelt and began drawing shapes in the dirt. For a moment, the street felt like a cemetery coming alive with ghosts. Not to haunt, but to mourn. But then the first scream pierced the air. It came from deeper down the street, a shriek of pain, of madness. Angela screamed, clutching her head. No, no, not again, please. The man dropped his wallet. The others began to panic, like trapped animals. Their eyes flickered wildly. It's coming, Angela cried. I can feel it. Marla backed up. What's coming? But no one answered. They only howled. And at exactly 4:00 a.m., it ended. Angela turned. Her face contorted. Her eyes went dead. And with a roar, she lunged. Marla slammed the shop door shut, heart hammering in her chest. The creatures outside pounded at the door once, twice, and then wandered away as if nothing had happened. The hour was over. The window fogged again with silence. Marla didn't sleep. She couldn't. They were waking up, but only for an hour. And something deep inside was fighting to take them back every time. Were they remembering their guilt, their final moments, their crimes? She opened her notebook and began writing. 3 a.m., they remember. They cry. They regret. They fear something. She underlined the last part. There was something worse than the infection, something that forced them back into the darkness. And tomorrow, she would find out what it was. Part 2, The Man in the Black Fog. The following evening, Marla sat in silence with the attic window open just a crack. Outside, Hollow Creek looked like a postcard of despair, dim, windless, and rotting. Somewhere in the distance, a cat screamed, or maybe it was something else. She didn't flinch. All she could think about was Angela, the zombie who had whispered her name, who had remembered her daughter, and then lost herself again. It had shaken Marla deeply. Not the violence, not the lunging. She was used to that. It was the look in Angela's eyes just before she turned. The sheer terror. The desperate fear not of Marla, but of something unseen. Something that made her scream. It's coming, she'd said. But what? Marla flipped open her notebook. She traced the scribbled sentence again and again. They fear something. She needed answers. And to get them, she needed someone who remembered more. Someone who could last longer than a few broken whispers before the rot took over again. She knew what she had to do. She had to capture one. It took her 2 days to prepare. 2 days of raiding nearby stores for rope boards and makeshift restraints. She fortified the shop basement, a dark, windowless space beneath the floorboards, once used for storing antique furniture. Now it was a cage, and she baited it. At 2:50 a.m., she stood by the open back alley, a can of tuna smashed against the ground. The smell drifted into the fog. They came slowly, 7 of them, wandering in slow circles as if dazed. She held her breath as they passed by her hiding spot. Then she saw him, a tall, thin man in a torn suit, dragging a rusted briefcase behind him like a phantom clinging to the past. His eyes looked less decayed, less empty. He was mumbling something. She moved fast, too fast. The snare she'd set tripped perfectly, jerking the man's feet out from under him and sending him crashing to the ground. He didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just watched her with haunted eyes as she pulled him into the basement and bolted the door. For a second, he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said. And then silence. At 3:01 a.m., his eyes changed. He blinked, coughed, and sat up with a groan. Marla shone the flashlight on his face. He didn't growl. He didn't lunge. Instead, he looked at her with disbelief. "Where am I?" he whispered. "You're safe," she said gently. "Sort of. You're in the basement of an old shop. You were infected, but you're awake now, at least for the next hour." He stared at her, slack-jawed. "I was infected?" "Yes, but you're not mindless. Not right now. I've seen it. You all change at 3 a.m. You remember." The man dropped his gaze. "My name is Clark," he said softly. "I was on my way to work when it happened. I saw a woman, her mouth covered in blood. Then a bus crashed. And then nothing. You've been walking the streets ever since." Clark winced. "I killed someone, didn't I?" Marla said nothing. He nodded slowly, tears welling up. "I can feel it. I can feel the guilt, like it's burned into my bones. I don't remember the details, but it's there. I feel it clawing at me." Marla leaned in. "What happens when the hour ends? Do you feel something pulling you back?" Clark's eyes widened. "Yes, a presence, like drowning in ink. It waits, and then it rips me back under. I fight it every time, but it always wins." Marla's throat went dry. "Do you know what it is?" Clark shivered. "We call him the man in the black fog." That name chilled her. "Who is he?" "I don't know," Clark whispered. "But we see him, in our minds, standing in the dark, watching. And when the hour ends, he walks toward us and everything disappears." Marla's hand trembled. "Have you ever spoken to him?" "No," Clark said. "But I think he's part of what we become, like a god of this plague, or its guardian. The moment we start to remember, he comes to take it all away." Marla's voice cracked. "Can you describe him?" Clark closed his eyes. "A tall man, no face, just shadow. He doesn't move like a person, more like smoke. But he has eyes, burning eyes. He whispers things, horrible things, things we did, things we'll do again. Hen," he jerked violently. His eyes rolled back. No, he's early. He's coming early tonight." Marla stumbled back as Clark thrashed against the restraints, his voice rising in panic. "I can feel him. He knows I'm talking. He's angry." And then Clark screamed. Not a mindless screech, but a soul-deep wail, like a man being torn for his own skin. Marla tried to hold him, tried to comfort him, but the change was already happening. The light in his eyes faded, and in its place, rage. He lunged, snapping the restraints partly loose, clawing at the air, snarling like an animal. Marla bolted up the stairs and slammed the basement door. Her hands shook as she locked it. Below, Clark roared. Then silence. The next morning, Marla opened the door again. Clark sat in the corner, still, empty, staring at nothing. She whispered his name. No response. She stepped closer. But just before reaching him, his head jerked toward her. Eyes dead. Teeth bared. She didn't return again that day. That night, she climbed to the roof of the shop and stared at the town's clock tower. It hadn't worked in months, yet it still cast a long shadow across Hollow Creek. What was the man in the black fog? A hallucination? A psychic manifestation of their guilt? Or something real? And why only at 3 a.m.? As if an answer, thunder rumbled far off, and mist began to creep in, curling like fingers through the alleyways. At 3 a.m. sharp, she saw them stop again. Dozens this time. Some cried. Some screamed. Some fell to their knees and begged the sky. And then she saw something new. A figure, not a zombie, but not quite human either, standing in the middle of the intersection. Tall, shadowy, motionless. Marla squinted. The street lamps flickered. The fog thickened around him. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. But every zombie in sight turned slowly and knelt. Even Clark, still restrained in the basement, began to weep and chant something unintelligible. Marla stepped back from the edge, heart racing. She had seen him, the man in the black fog, and now he had seen her. At dawn, Marla packed. She couldn't stay. Not after that. But before she left, she returned to the basement one last time. Clark was silent again. Still, she approached carefully. "Clark?" she whispered. His head turned, eyes pale, blank. But then, "Run," he whispered. She froze. He wasn't supposed to be awake. Not at this hour. "Run," he repeated. "He marked you." Marla's blood turned to ice. "Who marked me?" "The fog," Clark said. "You looked at him. He saw you. Now you won't just see him at night. He'll come in your dreams. In reflections, he'll find ways." Marla staggered back. "Why me?" Clark's expression shifted. "You care," he said. "You listen." He doesn't like that. Marla turned to flee. But Clark's last words followed her up the stairs like a curse. "Don't fall asleep at 3 a.m. That's where he visits inside." She left Hollow Creek that day. Found a ranger station miles into the forest. Boarded up. Abandoned. Safe, at least for now. She kept her clock set. She never slept at 3 a.m. Not once. But on the fifth night, just before the hour struck, she saw it. On the frosted window. A handprint. From the inside. And a whisper. Just one word. Her name. Part 3. The reflection never lies. The frost hadn't melted on the inside of the glass. Marla pressed her fingers to the window of the ranger station, staring at the lone handprint. Its outline was perfect, long, skeletal fingers stretched unnaturally wide. But what made her heart plummet was the warmth. The glass was still warm beneath the shape. Someone, or something, had touched it just moments ago, and she was completely alone. Or supposed to be. She checked the door again, confirmed the locks, even wedged a chair beneath the handle. Then she moved back, trembling. Her eyes flicked to the old mirror on the wall above the fireplace. She had covered it with a blanket the night before after seeing something strange in it. Her own reflection had twitched, just slightly, out of sync. Now she wasn't sure it had been her imagination. 3 a.m. was still 15 minutes away. She sat on the floor with her knees to her chest and her flashlight trained on the mirror, blanket still draped. If what Clark had said was true, then the man in the black fog could reach through mirrors, through sleep, through the mind. But not if she stayed awake. Not if she didn't look. Then something whispered. Not outside. Not in the room. Inside her head. "Why run, Marla? Don't you want to remember too?" She shot up, heart racing. The voice was familiar, but impossible. It was Angela, her daughter's voice, but soft, hollow, a trickle of memory soaked in dread. "No," Marla whispered to herself. "He's trying to get in. He's using her voice." But the whisper came again. They were people. They were loved. They hurt because they remember. "But you remember too, don't you?" Her mouth went dry. A knock came from the mirror. 3 times. A soft tap. Then a pause. Then again. Tap, tap, tap. She backed away slowly. The blanket began to rise. Something was pushing it outward from the inside. "No," she whispered. "You're not real. You're not real." The blanket dropped. Silence. But when she dared to look, her reflection was still staring at her, only she hadn't moved. By the time the sun rose, Marla hadn't slept. The mirror was shattered. She'd thrown her lantern at an hour before dawn. The glass was scattered across the wooden floor like razor snowflakes. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd already been seen, that it had marked her the moment she looked directly into it. So she packed again. This time, she took the journal. Clark's voice echoed in her head, and she needed answers. There had to be someone else who knew, someone who had seen the black fog and lived to speak about it. 2 towns over, there was a small survivor camp. She'd heard about it on the radio weeks ago. Faint signals from a group calling themselves the Wakeful, people who claimed they could resist the infection through lucid awareness. She had dismissed them as conspiracy theorists. But now she needed them. It took her a full day's drive and 2 close calls with wanderers, but she reached the outer edge of the camp by dusk. They didn't greet her with warmth. Guns first, questions later. But when she mentioned the black fog, everything changed. They brought her inside. A man named Ellis met her in a firelit bunker beneath a collapsed schoolhouse. He looked older than he was, like the nights had aged him by decades. "You've seen him?" he asked. Marla nodded. "In the mirror and in the street. I've spoken to one of them, a man named Clark." He remembered who he was. Ellis didn't look surprised. They all do, for that 1 hour, that cursed hour. "Why 3 a.m.?" she asked. Ellis lit a match, stared at the flame. Old folklore called it the devil's hour. But that's not why it matters now. See, the infection doesn't just kill. It replaces, rewrites the soul. But the rewrite fails for 60 minutes. Every night, like a glitch in the system. Marla leaned forward. "Then we could fix it." He looked at her sharply. "No, you can't fix a virus that isn't biological." She blinked. "What do you mean?" Ellis exhaled slowly. "The infection isn't just flesh. It's something older, a corruption, an idea given form, something summoned." Marla's skin crawled. "Summoned by who?" Ellis was silent for a long time. Then he pulled an old photograph from his coat. A faded image of 7 robed figures standing in a circle around a massive sigil etched into a forest floor. "I was there," he said. "I was one of them." Marla stared in disbelief. "You summoned this?" "No. We thought we were summoning knowledge. Truth. We were wrong. It gave us a god, or something like it. We called him Vurax. But now, survivors just call him the Black Fog." She backed away. "So you're responsible." "I tried to undo it." Ellis cried. "We all did. But he infects reality. He turned our guilt against us. That's why those infected can't stay sane. The more they remember, the more they suffer. And when they suffer too much, he takes over again." Marla clutched the arms of the chair. "He came to me last night." Ellis's face turned pale. "Then you don't have long." She stiffened. "What does that mean?" Ellis lowered his voice. "Everyone who's seen him up close, who's heard his whispers, they change. Not like the others. Slower, subtler, but they change. The dreams begin. The time slips. Reality starts to unravel. Until you don't know if you're still human." Marla's voice cracked. "How do I stop it?" He handed her a leather-bound book. Inside, pages were filled with symbols, diagrams, notes in Latin, and maps. "There's a place," he said, "where he was first summoned. A grove, deep in the red pines." Marla flipped to a marked page. "A ritual, a reversal. You think this can end it?" "I don't know," Ellis admitted. "But I do know this. You won't survive many more nights. Not once he's marked you." Marla took the book. "I'm going," she said. Ellis nodded. "But you won't go alone." They left that night. Marla, Ellis, and a teenage girl named Rae who claimed she'd lost her family to the infection, but had never once slept through 3 a.m. They traveled light, avoided the highways, stuck to the woods. The further they went, the stranger things got. Trees in unnatural shapes. Animals frozen in mid-movement. A crow suspended in the air as if hung from invisible thread. Reality was slipping. On the third night of travel, they made camp in the ruins of a burned-down farmhouse. At 2:58 a.m., Marla sat by the fire, eyes heavy, eyelids twitching. "Don't sleep?" Rae said sharply. Marla nodded. "I won't." But she did, just for a second. And in that second, she dreamed. She stood in a room made of mirrors. Dozens of versions of herself stared back, but not all were her. Some had rotting skin. Some had blood on their mouths. And one stood still, eyes pitch black, smiling. "You're already mine," it whispered. "You're just remembering." Then the mirrors cracked, and she woke up screaming. Ellis held her down. Rae poured cold water on her face. "You slept," Ellis said. "God help you. You slept at 3 a.m. Marla couldn't speak. Her hands were shaking. Her reflection in the metal canteen smiled without her. By the time they reached the grove, the world felt wrong. The air was too thick, the sky too dark, as if something was leaning against the edges of the world, trying to force its way through. The grove was circular, ringed by ancient stones covered in sigils. In the center, black vines curled like smoke. The heart of it all. Ellis unpacked a book and began the incantation. Marla stood at the edge. And suddenly, the world shifted. 3 a.m. struck. And from the trees, they came. Dozens of the infected, moving in perfect silence. But these weren't mindless. They stood in a ring, as if waiting. And behind them, the fog. Thick, cold. And inside it, the man. He stepped forward, no longer shadow but form. A body wrapped in smoke. A face with no features. Eyes burning red. "You should not remember," he said. Marla raised her voice. "But I do, and I won't stop." The creature stepped closer. "I gave you forgetfulness. I gave you peace." "You gave death," Ellis snarled. The ritual circle lit with fire. The sigils burned gold. The man in the black fog hissed. And then everything turned to chaos. To be continued in Part 4. Would you like me to continue with Part 4, 2,000 words, now? Part 4. The Hour of Remembrance. The ritual circle burned gold. Lines drawn in ancient language flared to life around Ellis, scorching the forest floor. He stood in the center with the leather-bound book clutched in his hands, chanting in a low, steady voice. The sound of his words seemed to warp the air itself, each syllable a strike against something unseen. Around the grove, the infected stood still. Dozens of them, eyes open, watching. They weren't twitching or snarling now. They were waiting. And in the center of them, just beyond the outer ring of flame, stood the man in the black fog. He didn't move, didn't speak. His presence was stillness made solid. Smoke drifted from beneath the edges of his cloak, curling upward like tendrils, hungry and alive. Rae gripped Marla's arm. "He's not stopping us," Rae whispered. "Because he's waiting for the hour," Marla said. "It's almost 3 a.m. Ellis chanted louder. The flames in the circle shot higher. The infected twitched. One fell to its knees and began to cry. The sound ripped through the silence like glass shattering underwater. Deep, gut-wrenching sobs that didn't belong to something inhuman. It sounded real. Human. Marla turned. The infected man, once a corpse-gray figure with a slack jaw and rotting cheeks, was now gripping his face, eyes wet and full of terror. "I remember," he whispered through blood. "Oh, God, I remember." Another joined him. Then another. Soon a chorus of broken voices filled the grove, each infected soul awakening inside a body they no longer controlled. Memories returning like a flood. They remembered their names, their homes, their children, and the things they had done while trapped inside the fog. One woman screamed until her vocal cords tore. Another ripped her own arms, as if trying to shed the skin that wasn't hers anymore. Ellis didn't stop chanting. If anything, he chanted faster. I see them, Rae whispered. They're trying to fight him. Marla looked at the black fog. He was turning his head slowly, watching the circle of fire, watching his creation slip away. And then he stepped forward. The flames that should have stopped him bent backward like wind-blown grass. "Finish it, Ellis," Marla shouted. But Ellis's eyes had gone white. He wasn't chanting anymore. He was screaming the words. Blood began to run from his nose. And then the book burst into flames in his hands. The world shattered. Light exploded from the ground. The circle of fire erupted into a dome, throwing Marla and Rae backward. The grove quaked. The infected dropped to the ground, writhing in pain or release. No one could tell which. And in the very center where the fog had stood, there was nothing, just silence. Ellis lay still, charred book smoldering beside him. Marla crawled to his side, shaking him. Ellis. His eyes fluttered open. He was pale, barely breathing. "Did it work?" she whispered. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. Then he smiled. A smile, not a victory, but relief. He was free. Then he died. The forest was still. The infected were gone, either fled, collapsed, or burned away with the fog. Rae stood beside Marla, staring at the empty space where the man had stood. "He's not gone," she said. Marla looked at her. "What do you mean?" "We saw it." Rae shook her head slowly. "His form is gone, but not him. He lives in the hour. The ritual didn't destroy him. It only drove him back." Marla's breath caught. "So he'll return?" "At 3 a.m., Rae said softly, "as he always has." They buried Ellis beneath the old grove. Marla etched a mark into one of the stones, an emblem from the book, the one she'd seen in every infected's eye. A ward, a warning. Then they left. They traveled for days, avoiding towns, avoiding mirrors. Word of their ritual spread quickly. Survivors spoke in hushed tones about the night the fog burned and the dead wept. Some believed the curse had ended. Marla knew better. Because 2 nights later, at exactly 3:00 a.m., she woke up in a town she didn't remember entering. Not a dream. Not a vision. She stood on a street of flickering lamps and broken signs. The sky was an unnatural red, and around her the dead walked, slow and sorrowful, but not mindless, not rotting. They looked normal. Some were children, some dressed for work, some held hands, and all of them looked at her as she passed, not with hunger, with recognition. Marla, one said, a young woman, no older than 20. Her skin shimmered like smoke. "Angela?" Marla whispered, tears springing to her eyes. The girl smiled. "I'm not your daughter," she said gently, "but I remember being her." Marla's knees buckled. She fell, and the world shifted. She awoke on the floor of a gas station 2 towns east. Rae was shaking her. "You were gone. For an hour. I couldn't find you. I thought—" Marla sat up. Her head throbbed. "I saw them." Rae went quiet. They were living again, but only there, in that hour. Rae nodded. "I think that's where he traps them. Not in this world, but in a sliver between. At 3 a.m. it overlaps." Marla stared at her hands. "I saw her, or something that wore her face." Rae didn't ask what that meant. They both knew. Over the next few weeks, Marla began keeping a journal of each 3 a.m. experience. It happened only when she was alone. Each time, she would wake up in a new place, a house, a train, a sunken church, always with them, always surrounded by the ones who remembered. Some tried to help her. Some tried to warn her. Others wept, silent and paralyzed by memory. And every time, just before she awoke, he appeared, the man in the black fog. Never close, never speaking, just watching. One night, he reached out a hand. She didn't take it. Then came the 19th night. Marla was staying in a boarded-up motel. 3 a.m. came. She didn't dream. She didn't move. But when she opened her eyes, her reflection in the TV screen was smiling again. She ran, fled across states, tried to outrun the hour. It followed. No matter how far she went, no matter how well she hid, it came. And slowly, she realized something worse. She wasn't just visiting the hour anymore. She was becoming part of it. One morning, Rae looked at her with fear in her eyes. "What is it?" Marla asked. Rae hesitated. "I saw your reflection this morning, in the truck window, and it didn't move when you did." That night, Marla stayed awake until 2:59 a.m. Then she stared into a mirror. She watched, waited. 3 a.m. Her reflection blinked and whispered, "Welcome back." The rest of the night was a blur. Voices, screams, a forest she hadn't entered, a town that didn't exist, a family that wasn't hers. And at the center of it all, him. He walked toward her, this time closer than ever before. His form was shifting like ink in water. She didn't run. She stepped forward. "Why me?" she asked. His voice was everywhere. "You remember, and memory is the door. What do you want?" "To be known." She trembled. "You were human once, weren't you?" His form cracked. A face flickered beneath the fog. For just a moment, it looked like hers. Then nothing. She awoke screaming. Marla stopped running. She began documenting instead, interviewing others who had entered the 3 a.m. state. The stories were all different, but one thread remained the same. They were all changing. One woman had begun speaking in voices not her own. One man could no longer see his reflection, only smoke. A child drew pictures of places no one recognized until they appeared weeks later during the hour. The world was blurring. The veil was thinning. And whatever lived in that cursed hour was learning how to stay longer. On the 30th night, Marla returned to the grove. Alone. No book. No ritual. Just her. She stood where Ellis died and waited. 3 a.m. The fog returned. The infected stood in silence. And the man in the black fog emerged. She walked toward him. This time he didn't resist. "You're not trying to stop me," she said. "No. You're letting me in." "Yes." She reached out a hand, and he took it. The world folded inward. The hour consumed her. And when the clock struck 4:00 a.m., she was gone. The next day, Rae found the grove empty. No Marla. No footprints. But in the ashes, a single line was carved into stone. "I remember, and now so will you." Part 5. The last hour. The town was empty again. Not abandoned, just hollow. Windows stood open like watching eyes. Doors swayed in the breeze. Everything had the strange, untouched look of a place that had never really existed. Rae stepped carefully down the main street, boots crunching over gravel that wasn't there hours ago. This was the third time the town had appeared to her. Only this time she'd chosen to come. 3 a.m. was approaching, and tonight she was going to find Marla. Somehow, deep in her bones, she knew Marla was still here, trapped in the hour between hours, the place where memories bled through the veil, and the dead woke only to remember the pain of what they'd become. She passed a cracked church. Its bell swung in the wind, though no breeze touched it. Shadows stretched across the cobblestone like long fingers. In a broken shop window, Rae caught a reflection and immediately turned away. It wasn't safe to look for long. Not here. Not now. Not while he was watching. The man in the black fog didn't walk like a person. He glided, always behind her, always just out of sight. Rae had learned not to run. Running only made him playful. It was better to keep calm, keep walking, keep focused. The clock on the post office struck once. 3 a.m. The hour had begun. Softly began to rise around her. Low at first, like distant thunder or a far-off engine, then louder. It came from beneath her feet, from the air itself. It was a sound of memory being peeled open. And with it came the dead, but they weren't groaning. They weren't limping or snarling. They were walking slowly, silently, holding hands, weeping. They passed Rae without even noticing her, each trapped in their own loop of forgotten life. One man clutched a photo of a child. Another whispered apologies to wind. A woman screamed, "I mean to," over and over until her mouth bled. Rae walked among them like a ghost. She reached the town square and stopped. There she was, Marla. Marla sat on the edge of a dried-up fountain. She was dressed in the same clothes from the night Rae last saw her. Her hair moved in slow motion, as if underwater. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and her mouth moved in silence. Rae ran to her. "Marla," she gasped, kneeling. "I found you." Marla didn't look up. Rae grabbed her shoulders and shook her gently. And then Marla blinked. Recognition flared in her eyes. She inhaled sharply, like surfacing from a dream. "Rae." "I'm here. I'm real. You're not alone." Marla looked around, horror blooming across her face. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to come. I couldn't leave you." Marla stood slowly. "He's letting me be me during the hour. He wants me to stay. And if you're here too, that means you're becoming part of it," Rae whispered. Marla nodded once. "It's too late for me, but maybe not for you." The ground shook. The fog rolled in like a crashing wave. Rae turned. He was coming. The man in the black fog. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him stood hundreds of the infected. Their eyes glowed dimly with memories they couldn't forget. Faces twisted with shame, rage, and grief. Children, old men, soldiers, nurses, teachers, people from towns that no longer existed. And they weren't just walking anymore. They were chanting. Not words, just names. Over and over. The names they once had. The names of the ones they'd lost. The names of the ones they'd killed. Rae backed away. "He's not just a monster," she breathed. "He's a collector." Marla nodded, eyes wide. "He feeds on who they used to be. And when they forget, he becomes them." The man stepped forward. He raised one long hand and pointed at Marla. A voice rippled across the square. "Your memory is ripe. Your pain, sweet. You have seen the hour. You have tasted the in-between. You are mine." Rae stepped between them. "No, you can't have her." The fog pulsed. "Would you trade for her?" Marla's eyes snapped open. "Rae, no." "Yes," Rae said, voice shaking. "I remember too. I remember everything. Take me instead." The man tilted his head. Smoke coiled upward from the edges of his body, like hands eager to strike. Then he nodded. Marla screamed. The fog surged forward, wrapping Rae in black tendrils. It pulled her off her feet, into the air, choking out her breath. But Rae didn't scream. She smiled. And then something unexpected happened. The fog recoiled. The man stepped back. Smoke flickered, because Rae wasn't afraid. She was ready. "You want memories?" she whispered, eyes glowing white. "Take mine." And she opened her mind. Years of trauma, pain, loss, the weight of survivor's guilt. The faces of every infected she'd had to leave behind. The smell of burning cities. The silence of empty homes. All of it. She poured it into him. And the man screamed. He stumbled back, smoke writhing. His shape began to collapse inward, like a building folding into itself. The infected screamed along with him, clutching their heads. The fog turned to steam, burning away in waves. And Rae fell. Marla caught her before she hit the ground. "You did it," Marla whispered. "You hurt him." Rae gasped, eyes wide with pain. "No, we did." All around them, the town began to shift. The sky broke open, bleeding golden light. The clock tower crumbled. And then, silence. When Marla opened her eyes again, it was dawn. A real dawn. She was in the grove. Birds chirped. Rae lay beside her, breathing slow but steady. There was no fog, no infected. And the book, once burned, now lay whole in the dirt beside them. Marla stood slowly. The trees were green again. The world was healing. She looked down at Rae, who stirred and opened her eyes. "Is it over?" Rae asked. Marla nodded. "I think the hour's been sealed." Over the next few days, word spread. No more 3 a.m. possessions. No more towns vanishing. No more undead remembering their sins. The veil had closed. Marla and Rae returned to the city, where other survivors began rebuilding. The world hadn't been destroyed, but it had changed. Everyone who had entered the hour remembered it. The infected never returned, but neither did those who were taken, except for one. 2 months later, Marla sat in a hospital room beside a comatose patient. His name tag read Ellis Vane. The doctors said he was brain dead, but Marla knew better, because at exactly 3 a.m. every night his eyes opened, and he whispered, "I remember." The end.